Turn off your lights. Make sure your doors and windows are locked. Things are about to get spooky. Candy for Ghosts by Capulet. The first Halloween after everyone died was as uneventful as you would expect. I ran through the streets eating stolen candy and drunkenly singing Monster Mash. It's the sort of thing you do when everyone in the world is dead and you've lost everything that matters. Of course, there is no you. There's only me. There's only ever me, the one the sickness left behind to suffer. The second Halloween after everyone died, I was planning on killing myself come New Year. I sat in the ruin of a rich person's home. I think he had been a doctor or lawyer or something. I wore his crimson silk bathrobe. I smoked his cigars. I was living what remained of someone else's good life. Then I heard a knock at the door. But of course I didn't. That would have been impossible. Except it happened again. I made my way to the big carved oak door. I slowly turned the brass knob and pulled. A 4-foot-tall mummy stood before me in the doorway. There was a line of other children in various costumes. They stretched halfway down the block. "Trick or treat," was all the ghost in the mummy costume said before I slammed the door in his 10-year-old face. I watched the blinds as the dead children walked off disappointed. I half expected them to throw eggs or toilet paper. One by one, they faded out of the world until there were nothing but shadows and empty air where they had once been. I guess it's true what they used to say about the veil between this shithole and the next being thin on Halloween. It's either that or I've gone insane. It's probably not insane. Reality is a sharp knife which I feel at all times. Anyway, as the old song goes, that year kept coming and they don't stop coming. Each Halloween, the children arrive at my door in their costumes. I sit in the darkness and wait for them to leave. Eventually, the children would head off disappointed. I'd be alone in the world again. The dead would be dead. No more uncomfortable reminders of lost hope and dreams. This year was different. Maybe it was the loneliness that had gotten to me. Maybe I've come to accept that I will be a ghost in the not-too-distant future. Maybe I just miss the way things used to be. This year, I journeyed into the remains of what was once a grocery store. After much searching, I found what I was looking for and carried it home. The it in question was a massive bag of caramel and green apple suckers. They were the sort I used to freaking love as a kid. My aunt would give them to me if I stayed still and didn't cry while she cut my hair. This year, when the kids arrived, I was standing in the doorway of that dilapidated mansion holding a big bowl of suckers. I even donned a pair of plastic vampire fangs I had found in the closet. The kids came up to me one by one or in pairs. I would compliment their costumes. They thanked me for the candy. There wasn't any talk of what had happened to them or the world. It didn't even matter anymore. Everything was as it was supposed to be. Then the children went away. They were always going to do that. The ghosts in my mind are now my only company. Still, there's always next year. I'll be alright. Happy Halloween. I whispered to myself as I stared drunkenly at the ceiling. Maybe next year, one of those smiling faces will belong to my son. He always liked those suckers, too. I ran outside with a plate of food to the poor woman about to pass out from starvation. I I could have given it to her much sooner, but there just weren't enough people around to witness the sweetest lady in the village save the day once again. My Haunted House by Anonymoose. I have what many people would call a warped childhood. Many children are raised on nursery rhymes, fairy tales, and Dr. Seuss. And while my childhood did have these memories, my mother included another genre in mine and my sister's upbringing: horror. I cannot count the number of times when my sister and I were reading some of Stephen King's short stories for bedtime rather than a more common child's story. Popsy was my favorite. I grew up watching the classic horror movies and being told ghost stories. Many people, when I tell this to them, ask me if I had a lot of nightmares as a child as a result. But the truth is quite the opposite. I was not afraid of boogeymen or ghosts. To me, ghosts and goblins were simply fictional characters that were only in books, movies, and in stories told around a campfire. The horror genre was simply a part of my life. I love the feeling of being scared. So naturally, Halloween was one of my favorite times of the year. I remember one Halloween many years ago. I was young, but not so young that I don't have first-hand memories of the events soon to follow. There was a Halloween attraction that was running just down the street from our house. It had been going on every Halloween for a few years, but my parents had never let my sister and me go before. And then, one year, we were finally given permission to go to this haunted attraction. The attraction was built into an old and abandoned manor home, just the sort of place where you would expect a Halloween attraction to be built. I remember being very excited as I wanted to get into the house because lots of people that were coming out were raving about how scary it was, and I was highly anticipating having my own time inside. Like most Halloween attractions, they let people inside the house in small groups. Because my sister and I were only children, the attendants at the door made sure that we were put in the same group as our parents. Finally, we stepped inside. Inside, it could have been any haunted house in America in the 90s, full of fake fog and grease-painted actors. I wasn't overly scared, because my mother always reminded me that actors are not allowed to touch you. But I jumped and screamed along with everyone else when a monster jumped out of the hidden nooks and crannies of the old manor home. Eventually made our way down into the basement, which was changed into a stereotypical mad doctor setting common in a lot of haunted houses. Needless to say, there was a lot of fake blood everywhere. But I'll never forget that basement because something just seemed a little out of place. Sometimes even the most normal thing can become diabolical if you alter the perspective. It's something you see in a few modern ghost haunting shows and B-shots. There was nothing that immediately jumped out as being evil. There was certainly nothing like The Exorcist happening, tipping me off that something was wrong. It was a simple sight, but that made it much more unnerving because it stood out against the overly horror backdrop of the decorated room. In amongst the bloody carnage of the mad doctor's operation room, I remember that an old woman was sitting in a far corner of the room. She looked to be in her 80s, had thinning gray hair, and was very thin. I'd be lying to myself if I said that she didn't scare me more than the rest of the attraction combined. At the time, I didn't have much understanding of the effects the different physical ailments can have on a person. But looking back now, I would say that she was a victim of a bad stroke. Sometimes a bad stroke will leave the person with one side of her face paralyzed, and that's exactly what had happened to her. One side of her face was drooping and saliva was leaking from the corner of her dropped mouth. She was talking, yelling at us as we passed by. Her words were badly slurred because of her paralyzed face, but I could make out what she was yelling. "Stop! Get out!" over and over again. Even passing through the basement and going out the other side, I could still hear her screaming in that awful, slurred way up the stairs. I was extremely disturbed by the sight of the old woman, but as I got away from her, I began to feel better. She was obviously an actor who was working for the attraction. Most of the attraction worked on jump scares, and she was obviously there to cater more to the psychological horror. Well, in any case, it worked. It certainly worked on me. We emerged out into the night once again and got that instant sense of relief that makes horror so addicting. The "we have survived" moment. My sister instantly began talking about which part was her favorite. An actor who had jumped out at her in a werewolf costume had been her favorite. When it came to my turn to share, I could think nothing besides that old woman I had seen. I told my family about how that old woman in the basement had scared me the most. "What woman in the basement, Ashley?" my mother asked. Shocked, I began to describe as well as I could what I had seen. When I had finished, my mother said that she hadn't seen any woman fitting that description down the basement. The rest of my family agreed with her. I put the incident out of my mind. Like I said, I didn't believe in ghosts and didn't believe they were real. I tried to rationalize why they had missed the old woman and her screams. Each attempt to do this was more pathetic than the last, but I knew that ghosts couldn't be real. The next year, I was eager to step foot in the old manor again, but I was horrified to discover that the haunted attraction had been shut down and would not be opening again. Since I lived so close to the haunt, a few people in my neighborhood had taken up jobs there. I asked around with them about why it had closed. The few people that would talk told me that the old manor home was really haunted with real ghosts, and that too many people were refusing to work there again because of the paranormal activity going on there. Their stories ranged from objects moving on their own to apparitions, and even to physical attacks against the living that entered certain parts of the house. I laughed it off. People were just letting the atmosphere of the Halloween haunt mess with them. It was just probably a couple of pranksters messing with the workers. But no matter how much I tried to explain to the workers about how it could be a couple of jokers messing around, they kept insisting that it was impossible for it to have been any human activity. But even as I tried to convince them, I couldn't help but remember the old woman that I had seen in the basement that no one else had seen. I was kind of nervous about the whole thing, and I wanted more information about the house. These days, you can look up anything on the internet and have answers in seconds, but in the 90s, it was not like that. Few people did have the internet at the time, but my family was not one that had access to the internet. So I went to the next best thing, my mother. I asked her about the old manor. At first, she was reluctant to tell me, which unnerved me more than anything because she had never shielded away from telling us things of that nature before. Finally, she told me what she knew. The manor started out as a private residence built in 1922, but the original owner lost the house in foreclosure. After that, it became a sanatorium, which is something like a small hospital. Just by virtue of being a hospital in an area where it was the only hospital around at the time, a lot of people passed away within the walls. In fact, there are some reports that say that there was at least one death a day within those walls during this time. But that was not even the part that my mother was reluctant to tell me. She told me that afterward, it became a nursing facility, and they were taking care of sicker, older people, just like the old woman I had seen during my walk through. But the records of the abuse that came out of that place were numerous. Many ex-employees confessed that they quit soon after being hired because of the vast amount of malpractice that happened there. My mother remembered all of this because it was in the newspapers when it was going on, and it was a huge deal in the community. It made me feel a little sick to think how these people, those human beings, were treated in that horrible place. And that's not all. Local legend has long said that the building was haunted by the tortured souls of the people who died under the horrible conditions there. The man who built the Halloween attraction there knew the history and the legends surrounding the place and built the attraction with the sole purpose of playing off those stories. It was then that I knew I had seen the ghost of a woman who had died in that building. She just wanted to spend her afterlife in peace, but instead, every year, her and her fellow ghosts were interrupted by living storming through their place in the thousands, turn their situation into a joke. And for the first time ever, I began to treat ghosts and spirits not as fictional creatures only meant to frighten and scare, but as real physical manifestations of a force that humans are not capable of understanding yet. The house, to this day, continues to be a hot spot for paranormal activity. The owner lets in a local paranormal group at least once a week, every Friday night, to do an investigation. Several ghost-themed television shows have filmed at that location. One show brought in a psychic medium who claims that the years the house spent as a Halloween attraction has forever scarred the house and the spirits who reside there. One thing is for sure. I'm now a lot more careful about checking out the history of any Halloween haunt I go to. Ghosts are everywhere, of course, but I'll never go to a place with such a sad history attached to it. And I haven't been able to be scared inside a Halloween attraction since. I don't scream, jump, or run away as the actors jump out at me. Nearly all my friends have commented on my bravery in the face of these Halloween attractions. But it's not bravery, not really. It's just lack of fear. Because it's hard to get scared by actors in makeup when you've been inside the real thing. She's had ALS for a while now, I said to my new neighbors, just after we moved halfway around the world, referring to my wife. Lucky for me, it had beaten her completely that she's paralyzed. Only me and her know our dirty little secret. And with that, our time together is coming to an end. If you have a story you'd like me to narrate, you can check out the description box or the pinned comment for the ways to send it my way. I'd like to thank my Patreons and members for your support. As always, guys, I really appreciate it and truly thank you so much. Last but never least, I'd like to thank the writers who let me read their stories. These both came from the Creepypasta Wiki. I don't use it all the time, but every once in a while I do find that I need some stories, and I always find some really good gems on there. Both of these had a nice little Halloween scare. To be the last one alive, but yet the kids still come on Halloween and trick-or-treat, and you just hope that your son will show up one day. To a haunted house that is, well, truly haunted. And the scars that that haunting, fake haunting anyways, has left on that house. Both very well written and a great enjoyment to read. If you enjoyed these stories, hit that like button and make sure it feels it. If you're new, please subscribe and turn that pretty little bell to all notifications. And of course, I would absolutely love a comment. Tell me what you thought, what kind of stories you like in the future, anything like that. If you're listening on the podcast and are able to, please leave a review. And if you're on Spotify, you can also leave a comment as well. And of course, no matter where you're listening/watching, if you just share this with anyone who might enjoy it, it helps out quite a bit. Gets my voice out to new people who might enjoy the stories I find as well. And if you want to help the channel in a more financial way, I do have Patreon and memberships where you get early access and a few other bonuses. Or if you just like to do like a donation/tips, I do have PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, and Super Thanks on YouTube. But as always, guys, thank you for watching and listening. It always has and always will mean the world to me. Sleep tight and don't let 42 bite.